Well, good morning. You're probably confused right now, because normally at the beginning of a service, we'd be kicking it off with people who are significantly more musically inclined than I am. I will not be singing for you. This is a different Sunday. This is our Parents and Caregivers Celebration Sunday for reasons that I'm going to say mostly beyond our control. We realized, as we were kind of planning our calendar, that we were not going to be able to give Mother's Day, Father's Day, the normal attention that we would like to give those days. We also were realizing that those days can be hard, they can be complicated. There's a complexity of feelings that folks feel on those days. And so we thought, what if for this year we experimented with something a little different, which is, what was that, Blair? What did we decide to experiment with?
What am I walking into?
You're walking into what is happening?
You have to ask David these questions because you never know. What is happening?
Yeah, what is today? Why is it weird?
Okay, so it's Parents and Caregivers Sunday, which I'm really excited about. Mother's Day and Father's Day kind of get loaded and heavy. And I wanted to give all of our parents and caregivers massages this year, and Matt nixed that in the budget.
Yeah, so
instead,
you can take that up with Matt O'Neill.
So instead, you get gifts from the kids today, which they're pretty comparable in my opinion.
Yeah.
A massage or a present.
Sure. So here's what this morning is going to look like. First off, you may notice that there are tinier humans than are typically present among us. So just first off, I want to kind of just set expectations. They may get restless, they may get noisy, and we are here for it. So just be prepared for that. Also, if this wasn't already obvious, the order of our experience this morning is going to be completely scrambled. So if you're new here with us, welcome. You're not going to know the difference. But if you're not new here with us, this might be a little disruptive, and that's kind of the point.
Yes, and speaking of scrambling things and smaller people being in here than normal, at the very back, Chris, could you wave at everyone? Chris is back there with some activities for the kids that are in here, or the adults that might need a doodle pad or a word search. All of that is back there at the table, so you can send them quietly to get things if you need to. Plus, it's a little walk, it's a little journey, adventures.
Blair and I are not merely your hosts or MCs this morning. We are also tag teaming the message, sermon, talk thing. And again, just to set expectations, almost sort of like with attention spans in mind, we are going to be breaking it up. So we're going to talk here for a few minutes, and then you will, in fact, get to hear from our incredible band, and then they will leave, and we have some other elements planned for you, and it's going to kind of just be a ride, a little bit of a roller coaster, so trust us. Talk to Chris. They are excellent if you need anything, and, coffee in the back, that's normal. That's like the one constant that we wanted to make sure we had for you this morning.
Yeah. Clearly we're scrambling things, which is why I was late to be on stage.
You weren't late, that was planned.
It was planned.
Yeah.
I don't know what I missed, though, in saying that, but it's kind of interesting that the two of us are up here. So do we want to explain why we're the two chosen ones?
Yes. Matt said he didn't have the bandwidth. Yeah.
Okay, so raise your hand if you ever saw the SNL skit where they did like the Obama translator. So there was one person. Yes, that's what I tried to get. I was like, can you talk and then I'll translate for you? But to translate that, just for the fun of it, actually, it's kind of a beautiful thing because I am a big fan that parenting is revolutionary and it's liberating and it's a formation process because we're all growing together. So David, as our community formation pastor, and then me with our kids and students, we're kind of a fun little duo.
Yeah. The pose wasn't planned. That was as the Spirit leads.
We paused for pictures, though.
We did, though. Thank you, Sarah. So and just to sort of build off what Blair's saying here, you might be sitting here thinking, well, I'm not a parent, perhaps, or you might be showing up not entirely sure how you relate to the content of this morning, and I kind of want to just stress to you, emphasize to you that regardless of how you feel like you are or are not relating to the things we're talking about this morning, we believe that this is really relevant for all of us, and especially I think this first thing that we're going to name, we are being borderline activatingly Southern Baptist this morning. All of our big ideas start with the letter P. We're going to be giving you 3 P words this morning: pressure, presence, and permission. But we want to start. We want to start with pressure. Talking about pressure.
Yeah, you won't be surprised. Most of you know this, but we know that parents and caregivers feel an immense amount of pressure every single moment, probably, of every day. I think it varies from person to person. Probably depends on your Enneagram type, your personality, like the things that really show up in your lives and the way you handle them. But we also, on the other side, know that students and kids also feel a tremendous amount of pressure. So we want to name a few of those things. You want to start us off on yours?
Yeah, and there is a ton of writing on this these days. Both my generation, millennials, Gen Z, and I don't even know what we've dubbed the younger generation after that, but there's just pressure upon pressure, just a compounding amount of pressure that kids these days feel. Things that seem maybe at first glance as simple or as benign as their grades, or the artistic endeavors or extracurriculars they do, sports and things like that. But then these things are intimately and inextricably tied to their futures. And from a very young age, they begin to associate things that maybe in previous generations would or could or should be fun with their future earning potential. They're in many ways, childhood has been commodified and become bound with future, and then all of that then gets sort of tied to or kind of held up side by side with just everything else going on in the world, just global conflict and economic distress and climate change and all of these things that kids are significantly more aware of than any previous generation, just because of the access to and advent of technology, of social media and things like that. And so kids are feeling these pressures, and as a result, parents are almost vicariously taking on those pressures, because we have parents also intimately aware of all of this and feeling the need to make sure that their kids don't get left behind, have some sort of competitive advantage in what is sort of this massive scarcity mentality when it comes to the future. So it's this future-oriented pressure that kind of ends up being this cycle between kids and parents, and then it really, really messes with the way that we are able to relate to each other.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think that our community in particular, whenever I sit down and have conversations with a lot of you, the question always goes back to, how do I parent after deconstruction or parent during deconstruction, as some of us are all still unbuilding and rebuilding. And so I think that's another pressure that you feel, is this pressure to do things differently than what you experienced as a child maybe. Even with the best parents, I think we all have some of those moments that come to the front. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big question. And then there are 3 questions that humans ask each other, specifically adolescents, but I think that this is the same 3 questions that adults are having to continually answer throughout seasons as they change. And it's, your identity is the first one, so who am I? Who am I in this space? Then belonging is the second one, so where do I fit? Who are my people? Who's in this with me? And then the third is your purpose. What kind of impact am I making in the world that I exist in today? So that's an adolescent thing, but it's also, I think, an adult thing because we're all continually recreating and reforming and new things are happening.
Yeah. So we're going to be turning things over to the band now, but we're going to be back to continue to explore some of these ideas, really with an eye towards, by the end of it, giving everyone in this room, kid, parent, caregiver, adult alike, a kind of permission to think about, explore, and relate to the pressures that we're talking about, the pressures of dismantling and rebuilding faith, the pressures of thinking about the future a little bit differently. So join us this morning, let the band lead, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Well, that's what you get whenever you give 4th and 5th graders a camera. And they do it all from the beginning to the end. We as adults did nothing with that video. So it was amazing. If you saw all of the raw footage, you would be super impressed with how that turned out. Because there was a lot of laughing, Caroline is probably one of the funniest humans that I've ever met in my life. She did say, please don't put on there that my parents don't support me in my journey, because that's not true. She was just trying to be funny. But as we landed pressure from the beginning, I thought that would be a great way to remind parents that you're not doing a bad job. You're doing better than you think. If the worst thing your kids think you do is make bacon terribly, which David's a really big bacon fan, for those who didn't know it.
High standards.
Like, no joke.
I give notes. Well, we go to brunch as a staff every now and then, usually to celebrate birthdays. And if you've ever seen Parks and Rec, those of you who chuckled, I don't even have to finish the sentence. Very Ron Swanson-esque in my approach to bacon. So
there you go. So you feel a lot of pressure, but you're doing a better job than you think. So good job.
Yeah. So, like I warned you, Southern Baptist fashion, so we started with pressure, and now we want to talk a little bit about presence, or the lack of presence that many of us experience relationally. I think both, this is going to get a little abstract, this is why I have a translator up here, both with ourselves, like lack of presence just relating to ourselves, and then an inability to feel presence with each other. And warning, I'm going to use a word that starts with A, not P here, but the thing that sort of creates an obstacle between, the pressure that we feel as parents and caregivers and also as kids, and experiencing presence with ourselves and with each other is anxiety. And just to unpack that briefly.
Wait, fun fact, did you know that that's the #1 psychological disorder in the U.S. right now?
I did, because you told me this week. As we were preparing for this, but yes, it is.
You are terrible at pretending to hear new things.
Another P word. So anxiety, and just to kind of oversimplify what anxiety is it's kind of creates a paralysis. Another P word. We're on fire with the P words today.
We are.
It creates a kind of paralysis, in part because the world we live in now has an overabundance of freedom, an overabundance of choices, an overabundance of possibility. And you would think that would be liberating. You would think that would make us feel empowered, as if, we have so many things to choose from. But coupled with the pressure that we're talking about, the pressure around securing our future, the pressure around the loss of a kind of certainty that Blair was making reference to, as our faith evolves, maybe from a sort of simple kind of either or, black and white expression of faith that many of us were raised with, to something more nuanced, something more complex, something more mysterious, that anxiety all of a sudden can be paralyzing, and there's a deep-seated fear that we might make the wrong choice. So for kids, it's if I make this choice, if I take this class as opposed to this class, or if I don't make this sports team, or don't spend time with this extracurricular, is my future going to be compromised in some way? And as parents, I relate to this. Up to this point, my kids have expressed almost no interest in playing sports. And that's great for my bank account. Many of you who have kids playing sports know that. That can be taxing. But I feel this anxiety is like, should I be pressuring them more? Should I be, nudging them? Are they going to hit middle school and all of a sudden be like, hey, why did you never push me into this? Because now all the other kids are really good at basketball or soccer or volleyball, and I don't even know the rules of these games. And it creates sort of this anxiety loop where us as parents or caregivers are almost like have a kind of analysis paralysis. Are we making the right choices? Are we doing things? Are our decisions now going to irreparably harm the futures of our kids? And that creates an obstacle to feeling present with ourselves and with one another.
Yeah, I think there's two responses, and David and I talked about this week, but one is the paralysis part of it. The other, it's not a P, which, the P words might be a little triggering for some parents that are potty training. So
yeah.
I know that's a real thing here. But the other thing is that instead of being paralyzed, you overcommit. Mm-hmm. So you overdo everything because you're trying to calm that anxiety that you feel. I had a friend share this with me this week, but Johns Hopkins actually just did a study about the 7 things that really matter whenever it comes to the way that you're present with your kids. And so I just want to share those because I feel like they're actually like tangible, applicable things that are important. And they actually, this was not planned, but they go with some of what Janet shared too in her story. But the first one is ability to talk to their families just about feelings. I know that there's a lot that goes into kind of laying the groundwork for your kids to feel safe with you and to talk. So these are not easy things necessarily, but they're important. The second thing is the felt experience of kids, that they are supported whenever something difficult happens. The third, which I love, is enjoyment in participation in community traditions. So the things that, how many of you grew up going to a youth group? Raise your hand. I know that there were things there that were imperfect, but there's something beautiful about the bond that you end up having. I will never feel disconnected from people that I traveled with, spent weekend retreats with, shared pizza with, played truth or dare with at night. Some people played spin the hymnal. That was not me, because I was a rule follower, you guys. The fourth thing, you're welcome. The fourth thing is feeling like they belong in high school. That's a huge one. Just the feeling of feeling like they actually belong while they're in high school. The fifth is being supported by their friends throughout their journey. The sixth, and this is where you all come into play, having 2 non-parent adults that they know genuinely care about their life. That could be coaches, it could be teachers that are here, it could be teachers at school. The possibilities are endless, but at least 2. I would prefer 5, but 2 is what Johns Hopkins said. And then the 7th is feeling like they are safe and protected, mostly at home, but wherever they are. A lot of our kids spend a lot of time at school, and that's actually a big pressure for kids. They do not feel safe at school anymore, and they do not know if an adult would actually protect them if something happened, which is a big pressure.
Yeah. So it would be unrealistic for us to promise that, after going away for a few more minutes, turning you back over to the band, and then coming back to conclude things in a little bit, that Blair and I are going to be able to sort of articulate comprehensive solutions to everything we're talking about. I mean, the pressures that we collectively experience, the anxiety that creates, the overcommitment that draws out for some of us, and the lack of presence that we're naming, it's a bigger thing. In many ways, part of the invitation to a community like Watershed is an acknowledgement that it's a bigger thing, an acknowledgement that navigating these things is slow work, and hopefully it's collective work, it's community work. It's the reason that we put so much emphasis and resource into our family ministry area. It's the reason that we at least try to equip and empower Blair as much as we can to not just be, and I think this is an important distinction, not just be a pastor to kids and students, but to parents and caregivers as well. That was a disconnect that when I did youth ministry, I always experienced. Parents often expected me to be their pastor, I mean the pastor to their kids, which is just not good math. We just don't have your kids as much as you do. And so it is far more effective to put at least as much, if not more, emphasis on parenting, but also pastoring the parents and caregivers. So I say that just to set expectations. We are going to step off for a second here. We'll come back to sort of kind of offer some perspective, some solutions, and some things like that. So maybe just some first words, not last words, when it comes to how do we give ourselves permission to do some of those 7 things that Blair talked about? So,
Yeah.
All right, awkward transition. All right, hard to follow that. So, if you were here last week, and if you weren't, I would encourage you to go back and listen. We had an amazing guest speaker, Josh Scott, from our friends over at Grace Point in the Nashville area, and he did a great job sort of reframing or recontextualizing the way that we understand and interpret Jesus' parables, all right? Without trying to spend too much time rehashing, kind of the simplified version of what he said is oftentimes we make the mistake of reading the parable. One, we identify Jesus or God with whoever the most powerful person in the story is. And then two, we imagine that the basic formula or point of the parable of the story is that it's somehow instructions on how to get to heaven. And Josh does a good job sort of subverting and undoing this, giving context, Jewish context around like the original audience and kind of what Jesus' contemporaries would have been thinking and experiencing as he told these stories. And so as we sort of land the plane here and talk about what does it look like to give yourself permission to relate to some of this pressure and to experience presence a little bit differently, we want to look at another one of Jesus' parables, and it's a very short one and it's a very well-known one. In Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 and 32, just 2 verses, it says this. He, Jesus, put before them another parable. Now I'm going to pause there because we're not going to go look at that other parable, but if some of you might actually like the idea of having some homework, believe it or not. I know that's surprising to half of you, but the other half of you are like, ooh, yeah, give me something to do. Go read the prior parable. I believe it's Matthew 13, I want to say 24 through 30, and it will make a different kind of sense in light of the conversation that we're having here this morning. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Just trust me, these 2 parables are intimately related. So he put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Now, I would venture to guess that there is a version of this story that many of you, perhaps not all of you, but many of you, especially those of you who grew up in a church context, understood. And this isn't the only time Jesus talks about mustard seeds, and in both instances, the sort of inherited reading of this story is that it's about how a very small amount of faith can make a huge difference. And maybe that's a little bit of Jesus' point. I'm not necessarily here to tell you it's not, but I wanted to give a little bit of context for how Jesus' contemporaries would have understood the mustard plant. I like this version in Matthew because it goes out of its way to kind of say, first off, it's actually kind of a shrub. And that's a clue, that's a hint towards what I think is a maybe more accurate and more subversive way of reading the story. Because oftentimes we think, it's the contrast. It's the little tiny seed, and it turns into this big majestic tree. But no, Jesus had access to majestic trees. They have cedars and bigger trees. If he was trying to make just a size like humility to majesty contrast, he had better options on the table that his audience would have known. He chose a glorified shrub that is incredibly invasive and hard to manage without intensive care, and one that both, if planted alongside other crops, would have gone against Torah, would have gone against the Jewish law, but also, per the parable, was attracting animals that were also considered unclean by the Jewish people. So his audience would have been like, wait a second, the kingdom of God is like a weed? It's like a disruptive, interrupting plant. And just, again, to give you some context, the prior parable, the one that I'm telling you to go read on your own time, it's literally all about someone coming in and sabotaging a wealthy landowner's crop with weeds. So maybe we reorient where the God character is postured in these stories. Here's the takeaway. Here's what I want you all to hear from this is, when it comes to parenting, when it comes to being a kid, when it comes to being present with one another and relating to these pressures, and you think of faith, or what does the kingdom of God look like? It's not this blind, if you just have just this little bit of faith, everything's going to blindly be okay. No. It's going to be disruptive. In fact, being disruptive, subverting the expectation, opting out of the norm, or opting out of what the dominant narrative tells you success looks like, is a feature, not a bug, of the kingdom of God. It is the point. And so if we can be inspired by this invasive, disruptive weed, the takeaway from that, and this is going to look different for each family. It might involve, kid-wise or parent-wise, it might involve opting out of something that you feel a certain kind of pressure to embody or be a part of. It might involve opting into something that you're passionate about that doesn't go along with the dominant narrative. There's not going to be a formulaic or normative expression of this, but it's going to be messy, and it's going to be disruptive. Can I share the Miss Frizzle quote, or did you
Please,
want to?
no.
So our inspiration for this, our sort of celebrity avatar that embodies this, is, of course, the Frizz, Ms. Frizzle, whose motto is, take chances, make mistakes, get messy. If there's a big idea here attached to this parable, it's that failure is not something to be avoided, but it is the very grounds for creating new possibilities. And this is a kind of almost subversive notion of failing forward, failing better, failing on purpose, because it's precisely those failures that open us up to new ways of being present with and for one another.
Yeah, we said that at the beginning, that we're all reforming and recreating something. So the permission here and the hope, I would say, is that we do stop and think about what's happening and recreate something moving forward. If you zoom out in the book of Matthew, like outside of this parable, they're constantly trying to figure out the kingdom of God. And they're constantly asking the questions I started with at the beginning, which is, what does it mean for me to be a different kind of person, which goes with your identity? And then what does it mean for the kingdom or the world to be different now, today? Which goes with belonging and purpose. And so there are references to kids throughout the book of Matthew. It's constant in there throughout the whole Bible. But they get split up into ages too, and age ranges. So if you go into the actual Greek translations of words, you realize that sometimes Jesus is talking about children who are trained, which is something that also refers to people who, like us, who have been completely formed by society and shaped. We have been told that we should strive for other identities, false identities, that are maybe not the most healthy. We are pushed towards capitalism, colonialism. There's so many things in there that we are not actually being our true selves. And then there's times that Jesus refers to babies. And the reference there, the symbolism is actually they're the ones that haven't been shaped by society. They're the ones that haven't been tainted. They're the ones that see the world in a different way. And so that's the hope, is that we end up being like that we step out of these places where we feel like we have to be a certain way, we have to show up a certain way, we have to be certain people, certain parents, certain high schoolers, certain middle schoolers, certain elementary students. There are so many things there, and the whole book of Matthew is being like it's pushing humanity away from that. And so my hope is that you all feel permission to be pushed outside of that too, to imagine a different world and to know that it's possible if we do it together.
Honestly, the kids have been less disruptive to our time together as I had hoped. So I guess good job, kids. Thank you, Caroline. But really, even the way that we structured this morning, inviting the kids with us, changing the order of service, it was meant to disrupt something that we've kind of conditioned ourselves to see as, like the order of success or a narrative defining success. If anything about just the different way that we've gone about experiencing our time together this morning has been disruptive, especially for those of you who are with us on a regular basis, that was intentional. There's a great book. This is kind of what I'll leave you with this morning. It's called Kids These Days. It's not a ministry book, but to me it is, because it's just looking at those pressures that we talked about, the pressures that our generation and the younger generations experience, and just how different that is, and how that manifests in some of these anxieties when it comes to both being a kid these days and parenting or being a caregiver or guardian for kids these days. And at the end of the book, it's sort of wrestling, trying to have some sort of takeaway, and it uses the example, and I've used this before, I think it's been enough time, like I can use the example again. It uses the example of the game Bop It. Have you all played Bop It? Do you enjoy playing Bop It? You can't win Bop It, because the better you are at Bop It, it just goes faster and faster and faster. And I'm not going to describe it for you today because kids are in the room, but Bop It is it's an unwinnable game. The only way to win at Bop It is to quit. It's to embrace failure and set it down, or let the batteries run out and it kind of runs its course on its own. And again, I don't want to be too prescriptive here, in the sense that different families are different situations are different. I don't know what putting down the Bop It looks like for you, but I understand that there could be a fear, a caution, a trepidation to, losing on purpose or opting out of these narratives, these expectations that are considered normative, that define success for what it means to be a kid, what it means to be a parent or caregiver. And I want to give you permission to do that, to set down the proverbial Bop It and to see what emerges from that. Because if there's a kind of a single big idea this morning, it's that new possibilities will emerge from that sort of failure, that sort of opting out. And crucially, and I'm not even going to pretend that this isn't a hard sell for continuing to be here and part of this, experiencing those possibilities, exploring those possibilities, and having the faith to opt out is so much easier in a community. It's so much easier when you have other adults, to Blair's point, who can carry the weight, carry the load with you, other kids, other students who are experiencing all the same things you're experiencing, all the same pressures, all the same anxieties. So let us leave you with an invitation to put down the Bop It, but to collectively put it down together, because that frees us to lean in, to live in, to really be with and for one another.
Yeah. We're going to move to a time of a really sweet song and a sweet person. I used to sing this song whenever we traveled with our youth choir, and it's just one of my favorite songs. It stayed with me. And so Poema is going to share that with you this morning. And then we get to meet 2 of our new babies that are here right after that. So enjoy.